Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a world that is, well, both instantly recognizable in its anxieties and utterly bafflingly strange. Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis.
It really is sometimes.
Yeah. So we've pulled together analyses, interpretations, biographical details about Kafka himself from our sources.
Lots to work with there.
Definitely our mission to really, understand this seminal work, its history, the man behind it, and why over a century later, it still resonates so deeply, sort of figuring out what makes something truly Kafkaesque.
Right, that term gets thrown around a lot.
It does, and you have to start with that opening, right? When Gregor Samsa woke up one morning from unsettling dreams, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous vermin. Boom.
Just like that. No preamble.
No explanation, just this absolute inexplicable transformation. It grabs you immediately. This novella, published way back in 1915, really does have this enduring power to beguile us and, like some sources put it, serves as a diagnostic mirror for the persistent anxieties of modernity.
And what's really fascinating about that opening something Kafka was apparently quite particular about is the ambiguity. What is he?
Exactly.
You get details, an armor-like back, a brown belly, many legs, pitifully thin, but never like a specific insect.
No pinned-down species.
No. And this deliberate vagueness, delivered with such a chillingly, almost detached, matter-of-fact tone, it immediately tells you something crucial about the universe this story inhabits.
Which is?
Well, it's one devoid of conventional order or, justice. Things just happen, bizarrely and without reason.
And Gregor's first thought isn't sheer terror at being a bug.
Which you totally expect.
Right. It's anxiety about missing work, missing the train, letting down the family he supports as the sole breadwinner, financing his sister Greet's studies, providing for his retired father and mother. It's almost darkly comical.
It really is. And that tells us everything, doesn't it, about Gregor's life before the change.
Also,
he was already isolated, already feeling like a functional object, maybe, reduced to an economic purpose for his family. The physical transformation in this light feels less like a random bolt from the blue.
And more like
an extreme external manifestation of that internal state, the dehumanization he was already experiencing.
Right. And then, almost on cue, his boss, the chief clerk, shows up at the door, demanding an explanation for his tardiness.
Perfect timing.
It's such a perfect, brutal illustration of what the sources call the unforgiving nature of the workforce and the dehumanizing aspects of capitalism that are just so central to the story.
Exactly. The system doesn't care why you're not there, only that you're not fulfilling your function. And when Gregor finally manages to reveal himself, oh boy.
Yeah, that's when the real horror begins for the family.
Their reaction is just visceral.
His mother faints straight away. His father's immediate response is just anger and violence.
No attempt at understanding, just repulsion.
And this is the moment his room, his private space, begins its transformation into, well, a literal and symbolic prison.
Definitely. Though his sister, Greet, initially steps into that role of a compassionate caregiver, doesn't she?
She does, yeah. Bringing him food, trying to make his space comfortable, cleaning up.
But that initial wave of sympathy, it starts to erode, doesn't it? As Gregor becomes more of a burden, requiring constant care, and crucially, no longer providing any income.
Her attitude shifts completely.
She does.
Absolutely. And the family's financial situation deteriorates rapidly. They all have to find work. His father gets a job as a bank guard.
Yeah, putting on that uniform again.
His mother and Greet take up sewing. The whole dynamic changes.
And amidst this growing resentment and struggle, there's that incredibly brutal moment. The father throwing an apple at Gregor, which lodges in his back. It's a physical wound that festered and, significantly contributed to his eventual death.
Which happens alone in his room. Just fades away. It's a quiet, really sad end for Gregor.
It is. But what our sources highlight as profoundly unsettling is the family's reaction after he dies.
Oh, the relief.
Yes, the sheer palpable sense of relief, like a huge weight's been lifted.
They immediately feel this surge of renewed hope, don't they? Walking outside into the sunshine, making plans for their future.
Specifically focusing on Greet's potential marriage, getting her settled.
It's a stark, uncomfortable paradox, isn't it? Gregor's individual catastrophe directly enables the family's liberation.
It feels almost parasitic, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
One life ending allows others to thrive. It suggests a dark dynamic where one member's suffering isn't just endured, but maybe, on some level, even unconsciously needed to clear the path for others.
Wow.
This paradox is a huge part of the novella's disquieting and provocative power, forcing us to ask tough questions about the conditional nature of love and dependency, especially when someone's value is just tied to what they can provide.
It really flips the script.
It does. The individual's tragedy isn't just personal, it's a catalyst for the collective's advancement in a deeply uncomfortable way.
So, how much of this disturbing reality springs from the mind and life of Franz Kafka himself? Let's unpack that.
Yeah, good transition.
Mhm.
Because his life seems absolutely central.
Born in Prague, 1883, German-speaking Jewish family.
And his own job, for instance, working at an insurance company, that was something he deeply resented.
Hated it, right?
Yeah, he saw it as consuming his time, his creativity. He called himself a martyr to his work, which directly mirrors Gregor's disdain for his job as a traveling salesman, a life he only endures out of obligation.
And Kafka struggled profoundly with self-doubt. He reportedly burned something like, 90% of his work?
Incredible, isn't it? Only published Metamorphosis when he was 32.
And he battled depression and social anxiety, felt tortured and inadequate, had notoriously difficult romantic relationships, never married.
These personal torments seem just deeply intertwined with Gregor's transformation. The change into a vermin, his isolation, his inability to communicate his inner state.
It feels symbolic.
Very much so. These can be seen as powerful symbols of that internalized self-disgust and perhaps even a physical manifestation of his mental health struggles. You know, the feeling of being an alien in one's own skin.
And arguably the most critical relationship in Kafka's life, and a lot of the source material points to this, was with his father, Hermann Kafka.
Oh, absolutely.
Often described as a huge, selfish, overbearing businessman, even a tyrant, Kafka's famous letter to his father.
Which he never actually sent.
Right. But it lays bare the impact of this relationship.
That letter is chillingly insightful. His father's constant disapproval, setting impossible standards, fostering feelings of rejection and failure. It all contributed significantly to Franz's profound inferiority complex. He rarely, if ever, got an admiring glance, as one source puts it.
And you see this echo in Mr. Samsa.
Definitely. You see this father complex manifesting not just in Mr. Samsa, but as a symbol of broader oppressive authorities across Kafka's work, the workplace, bureaucracy, even society itself. It highlights this theme of the self-abasement of Kafka's characters in the face of authority.
So Gregor's transformation into a monstrous vermin could be like a literal depiction of how Kafka felt about himself, a grotesque alien creature, inherently burdensome.
Precisely. It's almost like a psychological process turned outward, where self-loathing or feelings of inadequacy manifest as this perceived subhuman state.
But here's a twist, right? Some sources suggest.
The liberation angle.
Yeah. While it's obviously a horrific imprisonment, Gregor's metamorphosis can also be viewed as a form of subconscious escape. Kafka felt imprisoned in his ailing body and hated his job.
Much like Gregor was bound by debt to a life he detested.
So the monstrous change is a twisted, grotesque rebellion, a way to break free from those social and economic chains, even if the cost is unimaginable.
It's a complex form of agency through complete disempowerment.
It's
paradoxical.
And we should probably briefly mention his complex identity as a German-speaking Jew in Prague.
Good point. His family was assimilated, leaving him feeling somewhat marginalized, not fully belonging to any one group. The sense of being an outsider, a stranger in a bewildered universe, certainly resonates with Gregor's complete ostracization.
It all seems to fit together.
It really does. If you connect the dots, Kafka's personal battles, the dominating father, the hated job, the crushing self-doubt, feeling like an outsider, his own struggles with claustrophobia reflected in Gregor's room, that pervasive sense of failure, they're just deeply woven into the story.
Illustrating those core themes.
Exactly. Oppressive authority, labor dehumanization, deep alienation, marginalization, imprisonment, and the sheer fragility of identity when you strip away the external markers of value.
Okay, that transition from Kafka's life to the story's themes feels seamless because the parallels are so strong. Let's pivot now to the potent symbolism and core themes woven throughout the narrative itself.
Right. And at the absolute core of the metamorphosis is pervasive alienation. It's everywhere you look.
In multiple forms.
Absolutely. Gregor is alienated from himself, his human consciousness trapped in this animal body. His identity, once centered on his role as provider, becomes socially constructed rather than innate, as one analysis puts it, reduced purely to his repulsive bug form.
And from his family.
Totally. Their revulsion, the complete breakdown in communication because they literally can no longer understand his voice, that gap between his internal experience and their external perception is huge.
And from work, society.
Yeah, his life as a salesman was already described as a robotic life under the conditions of exploitation, making him feel like an automaton with only superficial, transitory relationships. The chief clerk is the embodiment of that dehumanizing aspect of capitalism.
His confinement just makes it literal.
Exactly. It literalizes his social ostracization.
All of that creates this overwhelming sense of, what? Existential dread and absurdity.
I think so. The transformation itself is utterly inexplicable, isn't it?
Completely random.
It plunges you into a random, chaotic universe where suffering just is, without apparent cause or reason. It completely challenges our need for rational explanations. In this world, the focus isn't why it happened, but simply that it happened, and how everyone reacts.
Very unsettling.
Very. And the story is also a really sharp critique of family and societal pressures. Gregor is fundamentally the family's piggy bank.
That's blunt, but true.
His entire value to them seems tied solely to his income. Once he stops providing, the conditional nature of their affection is exposed with brutal clarity.
The relief they feel at his death.
It really underscores this. And the story critiques society's tendency to marginalize and ostracize anyone who can't contribute economically or conform. You see that starkly with the three lodgers who just cannot stand his presence.
Okay, let's dig into some of those powerful symbols that deepen these themes. The insect itself, obviously, that's the big one.
It's the most potent symbol, no question. Gregor's change into a monstrous vermin isn't just about alienation and dehumanization. It embodies profound self-disgust and what the sources call the price we pay for failing to fit in.
It's multi-layered.
Totally. It's a metaphor for social anxiety, for the dehumanized worker under capitalism, for the feeling of being inherently repulsive or inadequate. It shows how psychological, social, and economic pressures can combine to reduce someone to something perceived as less than human.
His room becomes incredibly symbolic too, right?
Yes, absolutely. Initially just a bedroom, it quickly transforms into a symbol of his isolation, his physical and psychological imprisonment, and the terrifying shrinking of his world.
Like his whole universe is contracting.
Exactly. Some sources link it to Kafka's own struggles with claustrophobia and self-disgust, highlighting how even home, which should be a sanctuary, can become a source of oppression and confinement.
With apple, that feels significant.
The apple, thrown by his father, lodging in his back, it's such a stark, violent image. It symbolizes the ultimate act of paternal rejection, a physical wound that contributes directly to his demise.
Any other layers there?
Well, there are even potential biblical allusions here, some sources suggest, perhaps hinting at a fall from grace, adding maybe a spiritual layer to his suffering. It's complex.
Doors and windows, they seem important too.
Definitely. Doors are barriers. They symbolize the alienation and separation between Gregor and his family, physically and emotionally. Every locked door reinforces his isolation.
And windows?
Windows, on the other hand, offer these tantalizing glimpses of the outside world he can no longer access. They represent his lingering aspirations and hopes for a better future, but also just his anxious, isolated observation of a life moving on without him.
In Greet's music, her violin playing.
Initially, that's one of the last fragile links to his humanity, isn't it?
Yeah.
A moment of potential connection that deeply moves Gregor.
He feels something beyond the bugness.
Exactly. But as the story progresses, it also comes to symbolize Greet's evolving identity and independence, her ability to move on and pursue her own life, which ultimately marks Gregor's final, complete abandonment by the one person who initially showed him some care.
Wow, these symbols aren't just like literary devices.
No, they are integral to how the novella conveys its powerful, uncomfortable truths. They make the abstract themes feel concrete and visceral.
Given all these layers, it's no wonder the Metamorphosis is interpreted in so many ways. And it brings us back to that phrase. What does it truly mean to call something Kafkaesque?
Yeah, the story certainly invites a multitude of readings, and that's really part of its enduring power. Psychological interpretations are very common,
Like focusing on the father.
often drawing parallels to Kafka's own life, particularly his fraught relationship with his father. It's often seen through the lens of an Oedipal struggle, Gregor's conflict with Mr. Samsa, reflecting Kafka's own battle against overwhelming paternal authority.
But it's more than just the father figure, right?
Oh, absolutely. Crucially, many see the transformation itself as a powerful metaphor for mental illness. Specifically, the kind of debilitating depression and social anxiety Kafka himself suffered from.
How so?
Well, sources point out it captures the profound difficulty those with severe mental illness have in describing their suffering, while their families are often mystified and isolated by it. You can't explain the feeling.
That makes sense.
Some scholars even explore links to schizoid personality traits, given Gregor's isolation and detachment even before the change.
Stepping back, though, there are also strong sociopolitical interpretations.
Definitely. Gregor's life before the bug is seen as a scathing critique of the dehumanizing aspects of capitalism and the unforgiving nature of the workforce.
He's just a means to an end.
Reduced to a tool for profit, a mere cog in a larger machine. Some interpretations view Gregor as a symbol of the proletariat trapped and exploited by the system. It really feels like it captures the soul-crushing march of the Industrial Revolution and many problematic issues of the modern age.
So which is it? Psychological or sociopolitical?
And this is where the term Kafkaesque really comes together, I think. It's the interplay between the psychological and the sociopolitical that creates that unique feeling.
So they're connected.
Inseparably. Kafka's personal anxieties were undoubtedly exacerbated by his alienating bureaucratic job. Gregor's internal feeling of being a vermin is amplified and literalized by his external exploitation and the conditional love of his family.
Society makes the personal worse and vice versa.
Exactly. The story suggests that oppressive societal structures can induce psychological distress, and conversely, psychological states can make individuals incredibly vulnerable to marginalization by society. It's this totalizing experience where personal torment and societal critique are inseparable and mutually reinforcing. That's what defines the truly Kafkaesque.
And ultimately, despite the bizarre premise, the story taps into something universal about the human condition, doesn't it?
I believe so. It explores timeless themes of identity, the struggle against impossible, ever-present, all-consuming obligations, and that deeply human feeling of being misunderstood, unappreciated, and utterly alone.
Which feels very relatable, sadly.
It does, and this often leads to a few common questions from readers or even listeners maybe thinking about the story. A frequent one is, why did Gregor deserve this? What did he do?
The search for justice or cause and effect. Trying to make sense of it.
Exactly. But it's vital to grasp that Kafka's world, as presented, explicitly lacks order and justice. It's random, chaotic. Gregor's fate isn't a punishment for some sin. It's an absurd, inexplicable event.
The focus shifts.
Yeah, the story shifts the focus from why suffering happens to how individuals, families, and systems react to it. Another common thought is, was it just a dream?
People want an easy out.
Maybe. But Kafka presents it as literal reality within the narrative's world. The power comes from how he maintains this oddly realistic tone despite the utterly bizarre premise, forcing you to accept the impossible as fact.
And the ambiguity of the insect, Kafka famously asked his publisher not to draw it on the cover. He didn't want it visualized.
Yes, that ambiguity is incredibly deliberate and powerful. By not defining it precisely, he forces you, the reader, to focus on the feeling of being something repulsive, alien, and other.
So it can mean more things.
Exactly. This allows the symbol to resonate with a much broader range of fears: social, psychological, existential. The story's incredible power, its ability to beguile, is precisely because of its unsettling absurdity. It acts as a mirror, allowing us to glimpse our own potential internal monsters or vulnerabilities reflected in Gregor's grotesque state.
So let's bring this strange, powerful story right into your world today, listener. How does this connect with you? Think about Gregor's life before the change, that exhausting job, feeling like an automaton driven purely by obligation.
Yeah, that grind.
Doesn't that echo modern experiences of burnout, intense corporate pressure, the feeling of being a cog in a machine where your identity is just subsumed by your work? The story offers a powerful, uncomfortable critique of a world where your value is measured solely by your economic productivity. When that stops, well, your perceived value often vanishes.
And the Samsa family's reaction. As difficult as it is to confront, it serves as a stark, unsettling mirror to the immense strain chronic illness or disability can place on families.
Oh, that's a heavy parallel.
It exposes that challenging truth about how conditional love can feel tied to perceived utility, or the capacity to contribute, and the complex, often difficult emotions that arise in caregiving situations when the dynamic shifts so dramatically.
And Gregor's inability to communicate, to make his family understand his suffering or his inner state, that speaks to a profoundly universal feeling of being unheard, profoundly misunderstood, and isolated.
So many people feel that way.
It resonates powerfully today, especially in conversations around mental health struggles, social anxiety, or simply feeling disconnected from those around you.
And Gregor's complete struggle with his new identity, how he's seen by others versus how he feels internally, that connects deeply to modern identity crises,
When things change drastically.
particularly when unforeseen circumstances drastically change your life or how you perceive yourself and are perceived by the world. And the story's chilling commentary on societal indifference to those who cannot contribute economically or conform.
Still relevant.
Strikingly relevant when we consider issues like homelessness, disability rights, or simply the way society often dismisses those deemed unproductive.
So, the Metamorphosis is definitely not just a weird story about a bug.
Not at all.
It's a profound, enduring work that forces us to confront deep-seated anxieties about alienation, identity, and the immense, often oppressive pressures from family and society. Kafka's own struggles, his impossible relationship with his father, his crushing self-doubt, his pervasive anxiety are so deeply embedded in Gregor's story, giving it this raw, authentic emotional core that really transcends the bizarre premise.
Its disquieting and provocative power lies in its refusal to offer easy answers, I think. It forces us instead to look inward and outward, to confront uncomfortable truths about conditional love, economic dependency, and societal indifference to suffering.
It makes you think.
It compels us to reflect on how we define value, how we treat those who are different or struggling, and the systems that contribute to human isolation.
It truly leaves an indelible mark. So here's a final thought for you to mull over after this deep dive. How does Gregor's struggle reflect aspects of your own experience or observations in the modern world? How do we ensure that human value isn't solely tied to productivity? And what does it truly mean to be seen and understood when circumstances fundamentally change who we are or how we can interact with the world?